Okay, so just want to say hello and welcome to everybody. We are just about to jump into an exploration of the 2020 Aries Ingress chart for China and for Hong Kong. And we have two fantastic, really charismatic and entertaining astrologers here with us. We have S.J. Anderson. Hello, S.J.
Hello, hey, welcome.
Yeah, great. And then we've got Jupiter here as well. Hi, Jupiter.
Hi.
So we've got SJ who's going to look at China, Jupiter who's going to look at Hong Kong. I think we're going to open up with Hong Kong if I remember what we discussed. I'm going to be paying attention to the participants box in the chat box and help fielding in questions here. As they arise, so that you guys can, stay focused on your presentation. But beyond that, I'm going to go ahead and turn my video off and turn this over to you guys.
Thanks, Wade.
Not a problem. And Jupiter, you're good to share your screen when you're ready.
Okay. All right, I am sharing my screen so everyone can see it.
Yep, you look good. Can see, yep, your screen full size.
Okay. So let's get started. Hello, this is Jupiter from Hong Kong, and good morning to everyone. And we start to talk about the Aries Ingress chart 2020 based in Hong Kong. All right, so let me check how to move to the next slide. Oh, that doesn't work. Let me see. Oh, yes, right. So this is the Aries Ingress chart based in Hong Kong. And probably you may know that for all the Ingress chart, they have the planets in the same size, but they are of different houses based on the location. And so this is particularly based in Hong Kong. And very interesting that last year when I gave a talk for the 2020, last year in November, and when I look at this chart, it is very alarming that the Neptune is right on the MC of the chart. And it is to the exact degree, nearly to the exact minute of the chart. So it is something that you cannot ignore it when it is on the angle and it's up on midheaven. And this is very alarming because Neptune Pisces usually is related to infectious disease, and particularly for the Hong Kong charts. And we will explore it later because in the past, when there are Chiron or Neptune on some important position of the chart based in Hong Kong, there will be some influenza, infectious disease. So, so this one is quite alarming. Even though when we look into the Aries Ingress chart, usually we focused on the Capricorn stellium. So this is the planetary cycles, and the stellium is dominant in the chart. But for Hong Kong chart, this is the Neptune. And at the same time, the Sun is conjunct Chiron, which is also, and they are in the 10th house. So again, it's something related to disease, sickness, some problem with health. And so the whole thing is all about disease or virus or public health issues. And for the ascendant, it's very interesting that it is Gemini, 29 degrees 54 minutes. So it is a mutable sign, and the 4 angles, they are all in mutable sign, and that means that things are very changeable and predictable, and you really can't catch it. So things just keep on changing and changing. Oops. And the ruler of the ascendant is Mercury. Mercury is in the 9th house, Pisces, and it makes a sextile with Uranus in the 11th house. And again, this tells something about change and very sudden and unpredictable. And for the 29 degrees, the last degree, even last minute of the ascendant. So there is something coming to an end, and there will be a new beginning. And also the nodes are on the angles on the ascendant and descendant axis, which is also something very we need to notice. But the north node on the ascendant is something a little bit positive, adding to some positivity to the chart. And so for the ascendant, from Gemini, it will turn to Cancer in just like 6 minutes. And for the ruler of Cancer is the moon. The moon is in the 8th house, Aquarius. And the moon is not only the chart ruler, but it also talks something about the general people, the public of that place. And together with the stellium, they are all in the 8th house. Mars and Jupiter, they are in fact on the 8th house cusp. So it's the whole 8th house things. And 8th house is about something crisis, life-threatening. So we need really to take care about it. Oops. And for Mercury and Gemini, they rule the lungs, the respiratory system, and in Pisces, together with Neptune in Pisces, it is really going virus, infectious disease. And so, of course, the planetary cycles here, we have the Mars-Jupiter cycle, Jupiter-Pluto cycle, Saturn-Pluto cycle, and they just get started at very close time. And all the planets in Hong Kong charts, they are above the Earth. So it is like everyone noticed about it. So probably is the reason why people in Hong Kong, they start to do all the protection since January, because it is like it's very alarming and that everyone knows about it. And of course, here we have the experience of the coronavirus first version in back to 2003, the SARS. And so it is like an alert that whenever there is a little news about the coronavirus, people start to get a bit nervous and go to do all the protection, like wearing masks, wash hands, and yes, something like that. And very interesting that for the Aries Ingress chart, it started from March 20th. And I have like a statistics about the active cases of the coronavirus in Hong Kong. And before March 20th, you can see the cases are kept at very low number and it's quite flat. But right after the Aries Ingress, it's just like going up, like escalator. And so, and only recently when Mercury left Pisces, the number of cases drops. So it is very interesting to see these statistics in this way. And I'm not quite sure for the charts in other places, but right after the Aries Ingress, we have the Aquarius Ingress of Saturn, which is 2 days after the Aries Ingress. We want to say that, again, Neptune is right on the midheaven, and the Sun is conjunct Chiron with a close degree and in the 10th house. Moon and Mercury in Pisces in the 9th. So indeed, most of the cases after the Aries Ingress, they are sort of imported from foreign countries. That people, because many of the Western countries, they start to lock down, like in the US, in the European countries. So students studying there, they came back to Hong Kong, and thus the number of confirmed cases just start to increase and escalate. So the Aries Ingress of Saturn tells more about that. Is the Mercury-Moon conjunction in the 9th house, and Neptune in the 9th as well, though it conjuncts the MC. And again, the node is closer to the ascendant and descendant axis, and the stellium, they are all now in the 7th house. So it is like something foreign imported from other places. And I can't help studying the chart 2 days later again. It is the new moon chart on the 24th of March. And I don't know why the Neptune is still there. So Neptune is again on the angle on the descendant, and the new moon with Chiron is in the 7th house. And Mercury is in the 6th house, which is the house of illness. And all the angles are again in the mutable signs. So things are keeping changing and unpredictable. So, and this is the full moon chart which was in the 8th of April. And again, I don't really understand why Neptune is still hanging there. So this is very location based. Neptune is on the midheaven again and conjunct Mercury in Pisces again and Chiron, and they are all in the 10th house. So it is really alarming. But, oops. Okay, and the nodes again on the angle, and the ascendant of the full moon chart is 29 degree 56 Gemini. So all the charts in March and April, they just keep on repeating the same theme, and they look very similar, even though they are of different dates and time. And this is something that we need to notice about. So up till now, any comments or questions about the charts? They look really interesting.
The first comment that had come up was that I think there was quite a lot of interest in the number of cases dropping when Mercury left Pisces. That got it got a reaction out of me. I think that's quite interesting. But then somebody else said, wow, that's quite striking. Is this specifically for Hong Kong, Jupiter? Do you know?
Yes, I think because we will look to the charts in the past that Mercury, Pisces, Neptune, Chiron, they are very important in the SARS chart or in all the infectious disease chart. So I think they are quite particular to Hong Kong.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure that for other countries, obviously not for every countries, but it is very specific to the Hong Kong situation.
Got it. Got it. Boonsong has said that a strong Neptune at angles could mean a lot of unknown asymptomatic cases could be lurking around. And it had been mentioned in other, for the UK and the Australia one, that the publicity coming from government around the case information, maybe there's a Neptunian theme playing there too about how information of cases happening within China, within Hong Kong are getting publicized. Those are just some suggestions from, and then do you have any comment on that, Jupiter, or should I read the next one?
Yes, I would say for the Neptune, so sometimes you can't really stick to the numbers that reported by the government due to different reasons. But and also, it also tells that indeed in the situation in Hong Kong, the government way of dealing with the coronavirus, it is not as strict as in other countries. So we don't have a complete lockdown. We can still go out. Only the schools, they don't need to go to school, students, but people going to office, going to work, they keep on going to the office, and it is just there some limitation on the gatherings and close down of shops like karaoke, bars or gym things. Some only a few places, not all the shops, not all the office.
Right.
So probably it's also is something about the Neptunian thing, and very interesting that the comment saying about Neptune is like the number of reported cases might not be true or to the real numbers, but because of the Neptune, that people in Hong Kong, they just do what they want to do. So because they are so alarming of that, they just don't care about the cases or the regulations reported by the government. Because back to the January, we already took our measures our own measures of the people here instead of following the instructions or comment from the government. Yes, so any other question?
Yeah, great. So then it's not really a question per se, but somebody's mentioned that they wonder if the period between the Aries ingress to Mercury entering Aries might also have a correlation to the shifts in protesting. And there's been a look to see at how the 11th houses of the charts that you've been showing might reflect that, or I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
All right, so in terms of protesting, for the 11th house, it is the Uranus, only Uranus in the 11th house. So it is like a bit toned down at the moment because of the sort of half lockdown, even though it is not by the government, but because people just don't go out. So as compared to last year, the protest is just like not so intense as last year. And so the focus of Hong Kong now is on the coronavirus, but not so many conflicts on the streets as in last year. But the energy is still there. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Okay, great. That wraps up the questions that we've got so far.
All right, so I will go to okay. All right, this is the Capricorn Ingress chart in last year, December. Why I show this chart is, as you can see, that the statistics of the confirmed cases, that right after the Aries Ingress, the cases are mainly from foreign places, from other countries, that people come back from the UK or from the US. So back to Capricorn Ingress chart, we can see that again, it is the mutable ascendant. This Pisces 29 degrees, is again 29 degrees. And with this time, it is Chiron on the ascendant. So as I said, Chiron and Neptune, they played a very important role in the infectious disease in Hong Kong. And so, and 29 degrees, I would say that there is a sense of urgency, probably due to this kind of urgency, no matter in the Capricorn Ingress or the Aries Ingress, that people are very cautious and alarming to protect themselves. Whoops. Yes, and the ascendant ruler of this Capricorn Ingress chart is Jupiter in the 10th house again in Capricorn, and this conjunct the Sun. And so again, it says about is the general public, they are aware about it. And the Jupiter and the Sun is a conjunct Chiron, and sorry, it's not conjunct, it's square with Chiron. And again, it is like telling the message about the virus and awareness about that. And this time, the stellium, the Capricorn stellium, it is in the 10th. And so they all go public. And the ascendant, it is at the last degree of Pisces, and so it's going to Aries. With Aries, the ruler is Mars in Scorpio, and again, together with the moon in Scorpio in the 8th house again. So it is like the themes of the Capricorn Ingress and the Aries Ingress, they just repeat and repeat. And it is interesting, the Neptune here, it is in the 12th. So it is something still unknown. So back to say in January, we even didn't know what it is, but we have the memory of SARS. So we know, okay, that it is something related. So even though we don't know what it is, but we start to do all the protection. And so let's go back to 2002. This is the Capricorn Ingress in 2002 because the SARS, the first version of coronavirus, happened mainly in 2003, the springtime of 2003. And so you can see Neptune is in the 1st house here. And the moon ruling the 6th house is, it is in the 6th house again. So it is about the health issues, disease. And the moon is opposite to Mercury, which is about the lungs and respiratory system. But at that time, Mercury is in the 12th again. So it is totally something unknown. So it took a lot of time to know what it is about. It is like people just got sick and they die, and we don't know what that is. So this is the 12 things, I think. And again, the Chiron is in the 12th, but it makes a sextile with Mars and Venus in Scorpio. And so it is still something unknown, but people just know there is something there, but we don't know what it is. Okay, and this is back. I want to look at some eclipse charts because, oh, sorry, the slide keeps on changing. Whoops. Okay, so this is the lunar eclipse chart back to 2002. It was the June eclipse. Well, I want to show the eclipse chart because they really tell something about the stars. And the degrees, please notice the degrees of the eclipse here, because they are repeating in last eclipse in December 2019. So this is the eclipse chart based in Hong Kong lunar eclipse in June 2002. And the eclipses, the lunar eclipse is right on the angle on the ascendant descendant, and the moon was conjunct Chiron. And so this is very obvious that it's something related to disease, illness, wounds, things like that. And it is the moon conjunct Chiron, so it's related to general public. And the sixth house ruler, is Jupiter. Jupiter is in the first house and conjunct Mars, which is the malefic and about disaster, wounds, and yes. And Pluto is also in the sixth house. And this is the lunar eclipse chart in November 2002. And I want you to notice that it is the Chiron is on the ascendant again this time, and the eclipse point is the Sun is conjunct Mercury again. So Mercury, Neptune, Chiron, they all played important roles in the disease.
That's really interesting. Could you go back to that one for just a second?
Which one?
Yeah, the one that you just showed us. So
November. This is the November lunar eclipse.
Yeah, so
Right?
Wendy showed us in the lunar eclipse one.
Sorry, the mouse, because when I moved the mouse, the slide just moved.
Oh, okay, no worries. Yeah, Wendy was telling us in the UK lecture, she was able to find a chart for when coronavirus was first reported to the WHO, and the WHO, World Health Organization, came back and said that this was a matter of international concern. And that was in December, and Mars was at 27 degrees Scorpio. And of course, I believe that degree is also on the midheaven of the China chart. It depends on maybe which chart you're using, but it was something that she picked up. So it's interesting to see that the eclipse point also for the sun at least is 27 Scorpio.
Oh yeah, yes, it's the eclipse. Right. So any other comments or questions?
I think people are just making comments. I think you're good to continue.
Okay. I would say the eclipse chart, they were not as prominent as the Ingress chart of this year. But when we put that to the Hong Kong chart, it speaks everything. It is a three-wheel chart. So the inner one is the Hong Kong chart, which I used for the 1st of July 1997. And this is the time when Hong Kong was handed over to China. And so, and the middle wheel, it is the June eclipse chart in 2002. And the outer wheel, this is the November lunar eclipse chart in 2002. And what we can see here is for the June eclipse, when the eclipse formed the moon, it was conjunct Chiron, 3rd degree of Capricorn. It was on the midheaven of the Hong Kong chart. And again, the ascendant of the lunar eclipse chart together with the sun, it was on the IC. For the November lunar eclipse chart, Chiron was on the ascendant of that chart. And again, it was on the 6th degree, the same degree as in the June charts. And they make an opposition to the sun of Hong Kong. And so we noticed that the 3rd degree of Cancer Capricorn axis, it was very important to Hong Kong charts because it is the midheaven, the IC degree. And of course, the ascendant is also on the 3rd degree of the cardinal. And so we go back to the solar eclipse in December 2019. And so we can see, again, because the eclipse point was in Capricorn 4th degree last year. So again, it triggered the midheaven, midheaven MCIC axis of the Hong Kong chart. And so the ascendant of that eclipse chart conjunct Hong Kong's Saturn in the 1st degree. So in the 1st house. So it is again telling the story about that. So things is repeating and repeating. Yes, and okay, and the outer wheel, it is the lunar eclipse chart in January this year. And the lunar eclipse chart, the eclipse point is on Capricorn 20. And so the 20 degrees of the cardinal sign, it makes square to Saturn in the 1st house again. And so, and Saturn rules the 10th house, 11th house, and 12th house of the Hong Kong chart. So it is very important about that. And so, so it's like repeating theme and repeating story. And so I think due to such kind of memories of the SARS, that people were quite cautious about that. So the last one, so I can't stop myself from looking at the Cancer Ingress chart of this year. And so Neptune is again on the MC. Yes, and Neptune conjunct Mars, and Mars rules the 6th house again. The mutable sign again rules the angles, and it is 29 degree 50 Gemini, and again, so it is so fantastic. This time the moon and the sun, it is quite near the eclipse again, and they are on the ascendant of the chart. So also very interesting that Mercury retrograde in Cancer 14 degree 29. And this is the exact Mercury degree of the Hong Kong charts. And Mercury, yes, we know it's about the lung, the respiratory system. But of course, it can be something related to the schools or the communication system, transport system. But yes, it's so weird. It is the degree that repeats again. So I would say that probably in summer, there will be something coming back again. It can be coronavirus is the 3rd wave. It can be something related to that. We don't know because the viruses keep on changing. Like the mutable side is unpredictable. It's keep on changing. It has the 2nd version, 3rd version, 4th version of that. So yeah, this is the yes, but we can look into it in summer.
And Jupiter, Cameron's made a really good point here that again, that 27 Scorpio is on the cusp of the 6th house. I don't know if you.
Oh yes.
I think what might be really great if anybody's on this call but didn't get a chance to see the UK presentation, I'm going to post that the next day or so on YouTube. But I think it'd be great to take a look at that chart for the World Health Organization's alert on this. That 27 Scorpio is it's all over the place. So good catch on that, Cameron.
Yes, and very interesting that because there are many students studying in the UK from Hong Kong, so many of the confirmed cases in Hong Kong, they are coming back, they are bringing back from the students there. So probably it can
Wow.
be something related to UK.
I think that was actually something Australia said as well. You know, the number of international students that they bring in, that actually, you know, most of the cases were somehow connected to students' travel.
Yes, I agree. All right, so any more comments?
I can open up some questions if anybody's got any questions or comments for Jupiter. Just give them a second to see. It takes a minute to type, perhaps. Okay, I don't see anything coming through just yet, Jupiter, but if I see anything, I'll let you know.
All right, so I will stop my sharing and you can hand over to Anderson.
All right, SJ, up to you.
Let me unmute first of all, and then let me jump into a screen share. Okay, let me full screen. Okay. All right, how does that look? Everybody see?
Looks fantastic, yep.
Okay, wonderful. So just some point of clarification before I jump in here. I mean, I'm kind of trained in a little bit of a different tradition with mundane astrology, in particular, more of a, I guess, medieval or traditional or classic tradition. And so my charts are going to be a whole sign house charts. So they're a little bit different than what Jupiter showed. And a lot of the charts I look at will just include the 7 traditional planets and the planetary nodes. And so I don't think, I mean, with astrology, in my experience, there's often overlaps no matter what system you enter the portal with. So I don't think it's that big of a deal, but I just want to give everybody a heads up. So if things look a little different, you understand why. So here's my first slide. Obviously, we're talking about this astrological year. And here's the chart that I'm examining. The one thing that's striking to me from just hearing Jupiter is that the Beijing angles are cardinal. They're actually not mutable. And so, you know, it tells me there's going to be some differences in how Hong Kong and China are going to experience this next year, some maybe fundamental differences. And, you know, China is Hong Kong is a contiguous landmass with China, but yet there's these different political, situations. And so that's quite striking to me. But we'll come back to this. I'm going to start with some other charts and then do the Ingress chart at the end. But I just wanted to give everybody a quick look at this. Okay, so one point that I wanted to also begin with is that, you know, cultures are very different, and in particular, the Chinese culture is quite different from the way of life that we have in the West. And I feel I wanted to include this just because I'll be talking about China. However, I'm a Westerner, and I have experienced China. I lived in China, so I might have a little bit of an insight into some of the differences. But I think it's worth just noting that there are these striking differences. And one of the big ways people will frame this is that Confucianism is more of an interdependent philosophy. So it's more of a collective philosophy. Whereas in the Western philosophical tradition and, you know, our laws and English common law and all of the things we inherited generally have a more of an independent model of the individual. And we might see how that could unfold here in the charts, okay? The other interpretive principle I wanted to start out with is that we have this idea of the natal chart being king. And we're fortunate with China because we have a really good chart for China, for the CCP. People's Republic of China. So the CCP was founded earlier in the 1920s, but the People's Republic of China is this moment where on the 1st of October 1949, Mao Zedong proclaims, you know, the new China, right, the PRC. He does it in Tiananmen Square, and that was an ancient capital, but it becomes restored at this moment in 1949. So I want to just point out a few things about China's natal chart. First, you know, the one thing that's striking to me is that the luminaries are both in air signs. You have the moon in Aquarius and the sun in Libra. The ascendance is in the fixed air sign Aquarius. But I wanted to look at the triplicity lords of the air signs to get kind of a sense of the character of the current, Chinese government and the current situation there. Saturn can signify ownership, Mercury is trade and commerce, and Jupiter is the nation's wealth. And, if one thing is true about China, the modern China, the rising power China, is that it is really grounded in trade and kind of dominating in a way global trade. That is the kind of the great achievement of modern China. You see articles like this pop up all the time, but these are some recent articles about Europe owing money to China, the world owing money to China, the Western media will cast this in maybe a kind of a scary light. I mean, for me, it really speaks to the achievement of the Chinese engine of the global economy and just how important it is. We'll see more about this theme later, but that's embedded right in China's natal chart. The other thing is that the sixth house is quite important because you have the moon with the ascendant in the Chinese natal. And the moon signifies the people, crowds. The first house is the vitality of the nation, the character of the nation. And the sixth house is not only health and epidemics, but workers. And so, I mean, right in the name, the People's Republic of China, you really have this moon on the ascendant in the first house, reflecting even the naming of the government, and it's important here because this is an article that came out recently. Why do new disease outbreaks seem to always start in China? And they say there it's not a big mystery. It's because you have a concentrated population. And so the moon ruling that sixth house of outbreak and being in the first house, it's maybe an astrological explanation for why we have these outbreaks. And this goes in through the whole history of the 20th century, the various pandemics and flu, SARS, etc., all seeming to have started in China. The other thing I wanted to examine here is that the final dispositors in this chart, there's this synergy between the 7th, 9th, and 10th houses. And Wade was right, you've got the 23 degrees of Scorpio on the midheaven, but that's ruled by Mars and Leo in the 7th house. Mars in Leo is ruled by the Sun in the 9th house in Libra, and that's ruled by Venus in Scorpio in the 10th. So there's this kind of loop. And so these houses are really fused together. 7th house, the house of foreign relationships with other nations. 9th house, the house of trade, right? The trade channels, the global trade channels, which are so important to the Chinese economy. And then the 10th house of government authority. And to me, this is really telling a story of this idea of state capitalism that you find in China, where the state sort of is kind of really playing a significant role in the channels of trade, and then it's also in a literature called China's economic diplomacy. So China actually leading in its relations with other countries through this facet of trade, and that's something that's you'll see all over the literature. So, and here's another example of that. Recently, there was this row about Huawei. Huawei has been the leader in 5G technology. Europe and many countries in Europe and really all over the world had wanted to adopt Huawei, but this is now becoming controversial. We'll see more about this later. But the idea here is that China does have this trade, leading with trade, developing relationships with other countries through its trade. All right. The other thing that's really important in the Chinese natal chart, the sun, which is the authority, which is the kind of the leader in the 9th house of religion. And there is this notion, and I think it's probably not controversial, but you have this idea of a cult of personality that's embedded in the People's Republic of China and its history. And so here's, this is biography about Mao Zedong and how he projected his selfhood onto the nation. People are comparing President Xi, the current leader of China, to this kind of Mao strategy. And I'll tell you one anecdote. My first week in China, I went to a dim sum restaurant with some of my coworkers, and we sit down. It's this big place, and there's a massive TV. It's bigger than any sports bar that I'd ever seen in Texas, watching football in Texas growing up and recently. And it's just images of Xi. This is the CCTV, which is kind of like their CNN. And he's looking really nice in suits, and it's just, he's filling almost every frame. And I was like, wow, okay, that's different, that's new. But it's embedded in kind of the recent history of China, okay? So now I want to go to a little bit of a discussion of just generally mundane astrology for those of you who might not be as familiar with it. This is from James Herschel Holden's book. But basically, we look at Aries ingresses, eclipses, and Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions. And this year is unique because we have a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction later in the year. So it's a special year for mundane astrologers. The one point I wanted to make here about Holden, and I'll just have it on the other page, is that sometimes because of calculation problems, traditionally to analyze the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, astrologers would examine the Aries Ingress before the conjunction took place, which is the one we're examining now in this series of presentations. So there's an added importance here that this ingress is a root chart for the next 20 years. And you find this in a lot of the medieval and traditional mundane astrological practice. So we're looking at a root chart that might be around for a while, and all the degrees that you've been hearing, like I think 14, just all of the specific degrees can be returned to in the coming years. All right. So the other point I wanted to make is that this is from Ibn Isra restating Mashallah. These are two medieval astrologers and early medieval mundane astrologers. There's an idea in the literature that you look at the syzygy taking place before the Aries ingress. It's very important. And this principle is ancient. It's similar to the idea in natal astrology that we examine the syzygy or the prenatal lunation, or prenatal syzygy to get information about a nativity. You would also do this in the mundane context, and it comes from Ptolemy. And this is in the famous Tetrabiblos. And there's two translations here, but I'll just summarize it. Basically, I'll just read it here. You look at the 4 starting points, but you observe the syzygies of the sun and moon. That's the new or full moon that precede the sun's movement into these cardinal points, the solstices and the equinoxes. So I wanted to just, before I jump into the Aries ingress, look at just this principle and put it into practice of the pre-ingress syzygy. And it's very telling. I was really struck by this. And I've seen this not just in China and not just in 2019 and 2020, but all throughout history. This is a striking chart to use. So this is the March 7th, 2019 new moon in Pisces. And I focus, usually you just look at the sign of the ascendant for this. I'm not going to go too deep into this chart, but it's a Scorpio ascendant. The ascendant is 26 degrees, which is very near the midheaven of the Chinese 1949 natal chart, ruled by Mars. Mars is in exile or a detriment in the 7th house of foreign relations, foreign countries. And Mars in this chart is also ruling the house of sickness or epidemics, the 6th house. And so we have a nice story emerging here about sickness of the country being related to its foreign relations and being essential to the kind of national character for 2019. Okay, this story is one of the big stories of that year, that there was this military game event in Wuhan, and this is in the Chinese media. You see the stories coming out of the People's Daily. And so they're saying, you see this CNN story, that there's this conspiracy theory, so-called conspiracy theory, that according to Western commentators, that maybe the virus was brought by militaries coming to these games in October. And to me, it doesn't really matter which narrative you believe. The symbolism is still in this syzygy chart, because whether China exported the illness knowingly or unknowingly to foreign countries and effectively attacked those foreign countries, so-called, and I put that as so-called because I don't want to take a position on any of that. It's not necessary. We can look at the symbols and see the narratives that are emerging without having to say, well, this is definitely true or not. These are debates, and I'm not wading into that here. But either way, the ruler of the 6th house of sickness is in the 7th. Okay, so whether China exported it or they were attacked by a foreign nation, it really doesn't matter. The symbolism still fits. So the next ingress chart I wanted to examine is the one for this year. Sorry, the syzygy chart, pre-ingress syzygy chart is the one for this year. And just looking at the sun, ruling at 20 degrees Sag ascendant, Jupiter's placed in the 2nd house of national wealth. And I think it's worth taking a second here just to note how significant I think Jupiter's condition in all of these charts is, I mean, Jupiter is in fall, it's opposite its sign of exaltation. It's hammered there by the malefic planets. It's between Mars, it's between Saturn, and in the Ingress chart, it's actually what we would call enclosed by the malefics, not in this syzygy chart. But however, it's worth just contemplating this, because this idea, this idea that wealth is fallen is just highly relevant across the globe right now. But in this chart, you really see it, its placement in the second house of China's national wealth. And ruling the first house of the character of the nation during this period. And Jupiter in this chart also rules the fourth house of land, factories, production from the land. And so you're seeing these stories now coming out, and this is from a month ago. More stories like this have come out since, that China is really hurting economically. I mean, naturally, right? They shut their borders. And I hear this from the people I know there. I mean, every time I talk to someone, they say, some of my friends are saying that, you know, we've just written off 2020. That's kind of the narrative they're going with. Economically, they've just written it off. And so, you know, it's right here in the syzygy chart. Economic problems, wealth of the nation really being under pressure. Okay, so now I want to move on to the Ingress charts. There's an interpretive principle that is essential to what I'm going to do here, which is that you look at an Ingress chart and you ask yourself, what is the Lord of the year? And that's a planet that is the most prominent, the most powerful for that period. And there's different approaches. There's no clear answers. Different astrologers determined their Lord of the year using different algorithms and kind of different methods. But usually we can say angularity is important, proximity to the angles. So angular house placement is important, but really being charged by the actual angle is quite important, maybe most important. Dignity is important, and being a luminary is important. And then once we have the Lord of the year, once we've identified it, then we can look at the Lord of the year, its stations, its ingresses, and then eclipses to kind of time events of the following year and to kind of understand the nature of what might unfold. Okay, so let's start with Aries Ingress 2019. I want to come back to this, and you look at the Lord of the year here. I think it's pretty clear because Jupiter is right next to the midheaven. It's about a degree off the midheaven. Jupiter's in the 10th house, and Jupiter's in its domicile of Sagittarius. So I think that's a pretty clear candidate for the Lord of the year. It's right in the 10th house of national reputation, and it also rules the first of the character of the nation. You know, and so basically the story of Jupiter in 2019 is the story of China and its relationship in the world. And a side note here, 2019 was very important because it was the 70th anniversary of the foundation of the PRC. And so I was living in China at this time, and there was a massive, massive party. And everybody was involved in it. There was national days, always a holiday, but it was a special national day. But the thing is, and remember what I said, you watch Jupiter's transits. As soon as Jupiter hit Capricorn, and these are some of my tweets, and Wade also mentioned this earlier, but basically the 2nd of December is when Jupiter went from this highly beneficial condition into a fallen state. And this is right when the official onset of the novel coronavirus happened. On December 8th was the first report, I think, to the WHO, were the first reports in China. Now people are going back and looking at November and October, but according to the official narrative in the media at the time, it was December 8th, right after that Jupiter ingress. Okay, and it's one thing to note here if we're looking out. The other thing is ancient astrologer Toysler of Babylon had Jupiter signifying pneumonia, so it becomes fallen, and the natural signification of the planet then would be this pneumonia, that kind of this virus that can have pneumonia, can lead to pneumonia, life-threatening pneumonia. And just to note here, Jupiter will enter Pisces at the end for good at the end of 2021. So there may be some hope on the horizon. And SARS took about 18 months for it to finally clear. So watch Jupiter. Okay, so now let's move on. This is what we're all here for, Aries Ingress 2020. All right, and so the first thing I want to do is say, well, what's the Lord of the year? Who are our candidates in the chart? And I think that there's two. The sun is in Aries, exalted in Aries in the 10th house. And then you've got Mars at this 22 degrees of Capricorn, which is exalted. Mars is exalted in Capricorn. Now, the descendant is 11 degrees. So Mars is about 11 degrees off the descendant. And the MC is about 9 degrees away from the sun in a different sign. Even if we were to pick the sun as the Lord of the year, the sun is ruled by Aries. So it actually would answer to Aries, the sun is ruled by Mars. So it answers to Mars in the 7th house. So I like Mars. I kind of pick Mars here. It's not something where like, oh, we didn't pick the right one. Oh no, but let's just go with Mars for purposes of what I want to look at. And notice in the chart that the ruler of the 10th, this is the big feature that I saw that jumped right out at me. The ruler of the 10th, which is the leader, the national reputation, the government, that is in the 7th house of foreign relations. And so, and then the ruler of the 7th house of foreign relationships is in the 7th house. And so, you know, the thing to note about this is right away, China's relationship with adversaries or other countries is the feature of this period, of this 1 year cycle, and maybe this 20-year cycle. And so right out of the gate, I want to mention that. The other thing that I'm just going to start noting things that I've seen here. We've got the ruler of the 6th of illness in the 7th house of foreign relations, which tells us that the health of the nation is again interlinked and intertwined with how that nation will relate to other countries. And this can manifest in a number of ways, whether that is literally the health of the citizenry, or just this narrative about what happened early in the year becoming more prominent later in the year in terms of how China will relate to other countries, specifically a type of blame game that I think might be coming down the pike. So the next thing I want to note, ruler of the 2nd national wealth in the 10th house of national leader, government reputation. To me, this is probably about government moves to shore up the economy. I think that's coming, like it's coming all over the world. The government's having to intervene, support the individuals, support failing businesses, etc. And this is the other thing, and kind of the big question: Cold War or hot war? And I'm going to talk more about this later, but the dignity of the planets in the 7th house, and particularly Mars being exalted and then ruled by Saturn, being the domicile ruler of Capricorn in the 7th, this may be a mitigating factor. And of course, we're all hoping and praying that it is, that whatever tension emerges between China and other countries, this dignity may be, it's what Ben Dykston, he's my teacher, calls a reliable enemy. So it's an enemy that's just reliable, that you can use in the narrative to kind of effectuate your aims, as opposed to some kind of hot, conflict. And so we're all hoping that this just remains as a Cold War. You see this in the narrative. These are recent stories. April 7th, US and China closer to Cold War because of coronavirus. Again, coronavirus ruling the 6th, and that's in the 7th house where that stellium is. So another story, this is Simon Tisdall in The Guardian, bashing Beijing could trigger a new Cold War. And then we're seeing these stories as well. China has kicked out US journalists. You remember that Huawei story I showed you before? There's this real tension about maybe spying using technology, and it's not just one way. Let me be clear that China is spying on other countries. I mean, China doesn't let Google and Facebook into China because of the similar fears, and also any notion that there's a kind of a state-sponsored capitalism that's not present in the West. Let's just dispel that right away. I mean, anybody can look into the history of Google and Facebook and some of the early investment into those companies and their interconnectivity with the Pentagon. So it's not, for me, this isn't about China bad or China good or US right or US wrong. Again, I want to be very clear about that. All right, so here's some more features of the chart, okay? And I'm going to get through this and then we'll open it up and we can all talk. But in terms of timing, remember what I said earlier, Sun in Aries may be a candidate for the ruler of the year, Lord of the year. If we go with the Sun, we would want to look at eclipses of the Sun to try to time this astrological year. And there's 2 eclipses of the Sun. this June 21st eclipse, Jupiter had mentioned that earlier. That is right after the Cancer ingress, but it happens in the first house of the people, right at 0 degrees Cancer. And so this might be whatever is happening here, the flavor and how it impacts the national, kind of essential national qualities in China. I'd look for this June 21st date. 14th December is another solar eclipse. That's actually in the 6th house of illness. And so, there's all this talk of a second wave. I don't think anybody knows how the timing of this thing might come to fruition in terms of the virus and potential second waves. But this 6th house eclipse right there in December might be a candidate for some kind of second wave action. Now, if we use Mars, and this is kind of what I lean towards, that Mars, we want to look at his stations and ingresses to try to time this next year. And Mars is going to be the guy, the second half of this year. Every astrologer out there knows it, because Mars spends about 7 months in Aries. It's a long time for Mars to be in one sign, and in particular, the sign that he rules. So Mars can do Mars things very well, and this grinding away at martial, kind of Mars manifesting his significations. All right, he enters Aries on June 28th, and that's close to this eclipse, this June 21st eclipse. So I imagine that last 10 days of June, something will come to the surface here and tell us about the second half of the year, the rest of this year. The other thing is that on 10 September, Mars will station retrograde, something he only does every 2 years. But he's moving over, and this is the other big thing. This is why everybody's talking about it, or part of the reason is that Mars will be triggering the 22 degrees Capricorn placement in the Aries Ingress 3 times in the second half of the year. And so, I mean, if that was something we all were, uncomfortable or shocked by, this late degrees of Capricorn event that happened this year, we're going to have that triggered by Mars with a square aspect and an angular relationship in the second half of this year. It's a huge deal. That it is the Lord of the Year in the Chinese and the Beijing Aries Ingress chart. I think it will take on even more importance for China and for Beijing. Okay. So the 20th, Mars will station direct. So here I wanted just to talk a little bit about, look, we as astrologers, and I'm certainly myself, I'll speak for myself, I never want to what we might call negative project war into the collective. That's something I don't want to do. I want to project peace. I want to predict peace always, unequivocally, and I will use my platform to try to do that. However, we have symbols. We have a symbol set. We can't just turn away and pretend like things don't exist. All right. We have markers of war in this chart. Mars is the planet of war. The 7th house is the house of adversaries. Okay, but it doesn't have to mean hot war. It doesn't have to mean some kind of global conflagration. You already see in the narrative war on COVID-19 in the discourse. In my estimation, that could satisfy the symbolism of war in these charts. We have a global war on COVID-19. You see it in the Western media comparing this time to World War II, because certain things have happened, like the unemployment rate is similar to World War II. Being on lockdown is similar to World War II. Breadline similar to World War II. Rationing. So I want to note here that, just to be clear about that, peace, we want peace, okay? The last time that Mars retrograded fully in Aries was in the second half of 1941, however. And so I do think that the connections in the media to World War II are astrologically also emerging, connecting this period to 1941. And again, I think this could just be a global war on COVID-19. It doesn't have to be any kind of hot war. All right, so silver linings. Every chart, and this is just a general astrological principle, natal, any type of chart, where are the silver linings? Where's the egress out from difficulty? What can we lean into for positivity and hope? And this is something that the Australians were talking about yesterday. But in this chart, Venus is almost separated out from the story. Okay, it makes a trine to the 7th house, the Capricorn pile up, but it's in its own domicile, so it doesn't have to really answer back, directly to it, and it can maybe stand alone. And what is Venus? It's relationships. And I think the 11th house has a nice signification of maybe local organization or local networks of connectivity. And Venus in this chart also rules the 4th house, land, workers, the production of the landscape for the benefit of the people. And these are the stories that I'm seeing, and I can confirm this exists quite heavily in China. I knew people that I'd ask them, hey, what are you up to? What are you doing? They would spend their time volunteering, and this was before the virus. They had networks where they would travel to apartment complexes and help old people. And so there's this really strong network, these social support networks. And this article is great, Open Democracy, just type it in, social support networks, Open Democracy. But it goes into, since the COVID crisis, all of the kind of bottom up networks, distributed networks of support amongst people that have emerged in the wake of the crisis. And so I'm looking at that as being something that is extremely important for the next year, and not just in China, but I mean, it's shown here in the China chart, networks to help people helping each other. Okay, so that's my silver lining for the talk. I want to just give a shout out, Ben Dykes, that's my teacher. You can go to his website. You have the lectures. He's got a bunch of great resources on traditional mundane astrology. The other thing is this article is something I've relied on heavily through the years. It's a Deborah Holding, Tom Callanan and Sue Toohey article, but you can find it here. And if anybody wants these slides, you can email me. I'm right here, SJAnderson144 on Twitter. I know we're going to do some of that plugging later. But so at the end of this slide, I put charts up with all of the outer planets, because I know everybody wants to ask about that. And I've got a bunch of charts here that we can use for purposes of taking questions and having a conversation about, let me get all the way to the end, about anything people want to talk about. So I'm going to open it back up for questions now. Thanks for listening to my kind of intense sort of full press rant there. Wade, any questions? Anything?
Yeah, a couple have come up. There's a few here. You had mentioned the 6th and the 7th. 6th ruler in the 7th, and what Mark Pullen has pointed out is that the symbolism could also fit about cross-species transmission, because the 6th house signifies small animals. And so I just wanted to make sure that got some attention on, because I think that was a very, very astute point from him. So he's got two other points here, but I think I might do them in reverse order of how they were sent. The first is, could we also delineate Jupiter as the midheaven ruler in fall in 7th conjunct Mars? Like, what thoughts do we have there?
Jupiter as the midheaven ruler in fall conjunct Mars.
In the 7th.
I think in one of the charts in the 2009 pre-Ingress Syzygy chart, Jupiter ruled the midheaven. In this chart, oh yeah, right here, the MC degree. Yeah, I mean, the thing about the 9th is that I see, the one thing I really keep focused in on with the 9th house is kind of the channels of commerce, these global channels of kind of, maybe people say foreign travel, but I think if we look at this as the way that the connection between China and other countries, and China is built on foreign commerce. I mean, and the supply chain is the big keyword I was thinking about in terms of the 9th house. To me, the 9th house is the supply chain, and having, I think that the supply chain being disrupted because of the virus, and then potentially disrupted even more because of whatever oppositions emerge between China and its foreign partners. I definitely think that's part of the story that'll be unfolding, and you're seeing it now. I mean, countries are saying, "Wow, we were getting everything from China. How can we now get things domestically? How can we have a domestic medical industry, for example, to produce pills here, in America?" This is what they're saying. Let's start producing medical equipment in our own country, and that will be very disruptive for China. And so I think this is a trade war. And I should have mentioned that, but the trade war has been a big theme, especially in 2019. And so now with the coronavirus crisis, how is the trade war going to respond? The deal about the trade war, will it last? Will it fall apart? And I think this might indicate that maybe it will come under some pressure. But it's a great point. It's an absolutely great point.
Okay, great. Mark has also mentioned we are seeing the Hong Kong Authority with the PRC backing using virus focus as pretext to crack down on political opposition in Hong Kong. And he gives the example of the imprisonment of longtime advocates of democracy like Martin Lee. So he's curious about the take of, yeah, both of you, Jupiter and SJ, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, and my quick thought is that there's extra governmental networks of power that will have to be emerged, and you see that in this chart. The fourth house is the house of opposition, right? I was saying the house of the land, the workers, the production of the land. It's also the house of just the people in general, as opposed to the government trying to rule the people. And the ruler is again Venus in the 11th. The 11th doesn't really see the 10th, you know. So I think there's a real opportunity for networks of extra governmental power to emerge. And I'm not advocating like revolt or anything, but just, you know, networks of maybe black markets or underground movements between people that can be protected from that type of crackdown. Some of the things I've been exposed to living in China are particularly computer networks where information can be accessed. And so I think those might become more important to get access to the internet outside of China. But I'll let Jupiter come in here on the idea of crackdown and kind of maybe the Hong Kong protests, because I think she probably has way more you know, on the ground wisdom. So Jupiter,
Yeah.
what do you think about that?
Do you have any thoughts on that?
You're muted, Jupiter. You're muted.
Unmute yourself. Here, I got you.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes, for the charts in Hong Kong, particularly Neptune is so prevailing. So it's like something cover up. It's like foggy. So you don't know what is happening behind. And at the same time, the Capricorn stellium is such a controlling stellium. They are in the 8th house. So it is something like not so obvious, but threatening, or like it's a crisis, a danger. But the Neptune up on the midheaven is like covering up and making you just don't aware about it.
Mm. Thank you for that. Okay, I haven't seen any other questions come through, but I have seen a huge outpouring of gratitude for your presentation so far. If there aren't any other questions, I think what we'll do is we'll go ahead and say thank you to our presenters who have done a fantastic job today. Do either of you have anything that you'd like to advertise? I see that SJ, you went ahead and plugged some things. Jupiter, is there anything that you'd like to advertise before we go?
Currently, I only have my Facebook page and website in Chinese, but probably I think I need to make one in English. I don't know, like Twitter.
Yeah, right.
I can communicate with you guys better.
That might be a good idea when you've got time, you know, to invest on getting something like that done. Okay, well, thank you guys so much. This has been fantastic, really informative. Learned a lot about a lot of things. There's some new points have been brought up. I can see right in the comments here, there's you know, everybody's very grateful for the time that you put forward. So thank you. And thank you to everybody who attended. We do have one more with Lee Lehman and me tomorrow to explore the USA chart. So if you use the same login details you got here, you can access that tomorrow. That'll be at 4 p.m. Universal Time or GMT. So just be aware that UK time is not on GMT right now, so you might need to use a time zone converter. But all right, thanks everybody, and be well and stay safe. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, NSJ. Thanks, Jupiter.
Peace.